Okay, good evening. We are Happy Lag BaOmer. We are in the second class in the series on the art of Jewish parenting. In our last class, we talked about the importance of the way we approach our parenting, asking what is best for my child, which is not always an obvious thing. Sometimes we make decisions that seem to be in the best interests of the child, but really it's in our own best interests. And we also talked about the importance of and the way to teach children to have respect for their parents. And this is, again, something that is for the benefit of the children, that we establish ourselves as role models for our children. Today, I'd like to talk about a little bit more about how we go about being role models for our children once we've established that stance in our life, that our children need a role model. So let's talk a little bit about how we go about being a role model for our children. A story. This story was told by the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. And here he describes an incident from his own childhood. On Rosh Hashanah, he writes, the year 1887, when I was 7 years and several months old, I visited with my grandmother, and she treated me to a melon. I went out to the yard and sat with my friends on a bench directly opposite the window of my father, who was the Rebbe, the fifth Rebbe of Lubavitch, Reb Shalom Ber, and shared the melon with my friends. Father called me in and said to me, I noticed that you shared the melon with your friends, but that you didn't do it with your whole heart. And then he explained to me at length the idea of having a generous eye, tov ayin, and a begrudging eye, ra ayin. I was so deeply affected by Father's words that I was unable to recover for half an hour. I wept bitterly and threw up what I had eaten of the melon. What do you want from the child? Asked my mother. As perhaps some of us may feel, that's strong. Father replied, it's good this way. Now the trait of generosity will be ingrained in his character. This is education. So let's think for a moment. Does that phrase, this is education, resonate with you? How do you receive that? Do you think that the situation in which this 7-year-old boy shared a treat with his friends, but did so without his whole heart, was something that a parent should intervene in? So that's something to think about. Then we'll return to the story later on. As we mentioned earlier, we want to focus on the process of identifying how to be a role model. And but before that, we should think about what are the values that we want to instill in our children. So what are some values that people want their children to have? So if I asked you this, if I ask people, they might say, I want my child to be successful. I want them to have a good marriage. I want them to be kind. I want them to be smart. Or I want them to get good grades. So if we analyze the different values, the different goals that we have for our children, it may be important to identify, to separate these goals into two categories. One category would be outcomes, such as to have a good marriage, to be successful, to get good grades. Another category would be values or ethics, attitudes, such as to be hardworking or to be generous. If we look at these two categories, outcomes and values, outcomes are beyond our control, and we probably shouldn't stress over them. It's not worth really us having anxiety over the outcomes. This is in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's in the hands of so many factors that are beyond our control. However, what is our calling as parents is to focus on the values and the attitudes that we want our children to have, of course, in the hopes that they will result in the kind of outcomes that we wish. So we can't control the outcomes, but we should focus on the tools and the values that will bring it about. So let's think about how we go about doing that. If we can reflect on the most important things we learned from our own parents, take a moment to think about the things that the things that we're careful about, or the things that we do, the good things that we do, that we received from our parents. If we think about, now we think about, how did I learn that? So most likely we learned it from the things that our parents, the way our parents behaved, even more than what they said. A parent came complaining, saying, "I'm so worried, my child doesn't listen to me at all. They never listen to me." So I said, "Don't worry about that. What you need to worry about is that they're always watching you." And so if we think about how we can instill values in our children, think about the fact that they are always watching us, and they and therefore, in order for us to instill those values in our children, the most important thing is to instill those values in ourselves and to live those values. A chassid in Russia hired a melamed, a teacher, to teach his child. In those days, they didn't have formal schools, and so if you wanted your children to learn, you would hire maybe a few families would gather together, or if someone was wealthy, they would have someone teach come and teach just their children. And so he hired this teacher, and then later on, another teacher came and said, "Why did you hire this other fellow? You know me, and I'm so much more skilled and so much more learned than the other fellow." And so the chassid said, "The reason I hired the other fellow is because he has more yiras shamayim. He has more fear of heaven. He's more sincere." He says, "That's fine, but I can teach successfully. I'm a very successful and very skilled teacher." And so the chassid answered, "From this teacher, they will learn to fear God. And from you, they would only learn how to teach others to fear God." And so if we want to really instill those values in a meaningful way, it's important that we, of course, as we spoke in the last class, point those things out to our children and explain to them about our values, but those values have to be expressed in our own personal life. And so when we talk about parenting, actually parenting is somewhat of a misnomer. It suggests that it's something that we do. And in truth, parenting is something that we are. We are parents. It is our personal behavior and a conduct that ultimately is one of the most important foundations for our children's development. And so it is being the kind of parent that will be a good teacher and role model for our children. In fact, the Rav Moshe Sofer, the Chassam Sofer, writes, "Those who teach Torah to children should be Yirei Shamayim, exceedingly God-fearing and devout, because words that emanate from the reverent heart penetrates the hearts of the young listeners and instills in them love and awe of God. And he points to the fact that we say in Shema, in our daily prayers, V'hoyu ha'devarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha. These words we read in the Shema that I command you this day shall be upon your hearts, and you shall teach them thoroughly to your children. And so it's something, when we teach something to our children, it should be that necessitates, or that is most successful when it's something that we've worked on instilling in our own hearts. Now, of course, nobody's perfect, and we shouldn't hold back teaching our children something because we don't feel perfect in it, but certainly our work should be to aspire to be the kind of parent that we want our children to learn from. A classic example of this in Torah teaching is the story of Yosef Hadzadik. One of the most famous stories of Yosef Hadzadik is his encounter with the wife of Potiphar, who was trying to seduce him. And the Talmud tells us that she was working on him for a year. And of course, Yosef was very vulnerable. He was a teenager. And he was, after all, a servant. So we talk about power imbalances. The wife of Potiphar was far more powerful than he was and had influence over his life. And there was a lot for him to risk, and he was certainly alone, isolated from his family. The consequences of him not succumbing to these advances were far greater than you would think the consequences of not succumbing. And so the Midrash tells us, what was it that motivated Yosef, that strengthened him to be able to fight this temptation? Rav Huna said in the name of Rav Masna, he saw ikyonin shel aviv ra'a v'tzinen damo. He saw the visage of his father Yaakov, and it cooled his blood. Rabbi Menachema said, in the name of Rabbi Ami, the yuknin shel imo ra'a v'tzinen damo. It was the visage of his mother Rachel that cooled his blood. And so here we see this classic teaching from the Torah, which demonstrates that it was not necessarily something that his parents taught him, but simply the image of his parents, the kind of the model that he saw of them, that stopped him from committing adultery. So the same is also true in the reverse, that if a person models bad behavior, the children will follow it. And the Talmud, Gemara and Sukkah says, Lo lema inish liyanuka, a person should not say to a child, I will give them something, and then not give it to them. For the child will thus be taught to say falsehood. So it's a classic principle in behavior management, that when you threaten a child or you promise something to a child, you will only promise them something that you're going to follow through on. And you only threaten something that you're going to follow through on, right? If you don't tell a child, I'm going to ground you for a year, no matter how angry you are, because you know you're not going to do that. So if you're going to threaten something, it should be something that you're going to absolutely be reasonably able to follow through on. So this is a matter of trust between you and the child. You want to establish kind of that when you say something, you mean it. But here the Gemara is telling us another, maybe even more important reason for not threatening or promising something that you can't follow through on, which is that it models untruth to the child and teaches them that that words don't need to mean anything. And so again, it's this idea of the model. So this is something that parents struggle with all the time. You want to take the child to an amusement park, and if you say that the child is under 13, you get a discount. And so you tell them that the child is over 13. You tell them that the child is under 13. When the child sees that, that teaches the child that honesty is not important. But if you say, look, you're 13, your birthday was 2 days ago, and we're going to pay the fee, that extra money that you pay is priceless, because the feedback from that, the result from that, is that we have taught our child in a really meaningful way the value of honesty that we want them to emulate. Another example from Torah about the importance of the nature of modeling to a child is an interesting story. Yaakov Avinu was he left home. His parents, he had conflict with his brother, another time, a topic for another time, sibling rivalry. But in any case, he had a conflict with his brother, and his parents suggested that he go out of town for a while and also look to get married. And the Torah tells us that Yaakov arrived at the home of Lavan with only his walking stick, completely penniless. Why did Yaakov arrive penniless? Rashi tells us that this is, he quotes a midrash, this is because Esav commanded his son Eliphaz to pursue Yaakov and to kill him. But because Eliphaz had grown up in Yitzchak's lap, he was reluctant to kill Yaakov. So Eliphaz said to Yaakov, what shall I do about my father's command? So Eliphaz encounters Yaakov. He tells him, look, buddy, I have to, Uncle Yaakov, I'm sorry, I have to kill you because my father commanded me to. And Yaakov said, don't kill me. Eliphaz says, but my father commanded me to kill you. And so Yaakov said, take everything I own. And in so doing, technically, I will be ani chashuv kemes, I will be a pauper. And as a pauper, I'm considered like a dead man. So you look at this moral dilemma that Eliphaz faces, right? He is he's embodying these two lessons that he learned, these two models, these two values that he has instilled in him. One, the willingness to kill, which he learned from his father. And on the other hand, the commitment and the sense of duty to listen to his father. And this too, he learned from his own father, as we know from the Midrash, that Esav was very meticulous in honoring his father. And so, we could see how Eliphaz had absorbed behaviors, both positive and negative, that were modeled by his own father. If you also think about it, Yitzchak and Rivka themselves, I want to say, on the other hand, it doesn't necessarily mean that children who turn out well, it's 100% because of their parents, or children who turn out not well, it's also necessarily because of their parents. As we know, Yitzchak, Esav, in our story, was the child of Yitzchak. And Rivka herself was the child of wicked people, and she herself became very righteous. So again, it isn't 100% in our control, but our aspiration, our work is to model. And that's really kind of, we have to think about, what is our job, right? A Jew is always asking, what is my obligation? What is my work as a servant of Hashem? And my work as a servant of Hashem is to be the best parent that I can be. And that means to model good behavior. So it also, we could think about how qualities are transmitted to our children and not necessarily behaviors. So essentially, if our child is struggling in a certain area, we would be best served to take some time to think about, where am I in my own personal life in this particular quality, and can I work on myself in order to improve my child's behavior? And this goes along with the idea of putting on your own oxygen mask before you put on the oxygen mask of your children. And we say this generally because, a parent needs to sleep well, they need to eat well so they can be rested, so that they can be the best parent they can be. And if they focus only on their children, then they aren't able to parent. But on a deeper level, we're saying that the best way to be a parent and the best tool that we have for parenting is our own spiritual well-being. Now, an important, just as an aside, an important tool in the parenting toolkit is timeout. And I'm not referring to the timeout that we put our children in timeout, but the timeout that we take for ourselves. Sometimes we may see ourselves getting frustrated or feeling out of control with our children. And a very important tool is sometimes to take a 5-minute timeout for ourselves. And we can even tell this to our children. I'm getting really upset right now, and I feel like I'm going to do something that I don't want to do, and so I'm going to go in timeout now. And we can each think about this, or whatever the context is. But definitely taking time out for ourselves, sometimes it's worth it to take a 5-minute timeout and to calm ourselves down and to come back to the child than it is to keep banging our head against the wall. And of course, I'm not talking about, we'll talk about how to implement discipline with children in another class, but certainly this idea of self-care and managing our own selves as a parent is critical and the foundation of everything. So that's parenting, that's parents as role models. The question I want to ask now is, what is there beyond role modeling? Is that all there is? So far, what we learned, I would say that, based on what we said so far, we would say that the only tool that we have as parents is ourselves. There's a famous verse from Mishlei that says, "Chanoch lenar al pi darko gam ki yazkin lo yasur mimena." Educate a child according to their way. Even when they grow old, they will not turn away. So, if parenting is role modeling, then there's no need to consider the way educating a child according to their own way. And so Mishlei is teaching us here that there is also something called teaching in addition to role modeling. Chinuch, education, means working with the child and educating them, but that it should be done according to the way of the child, what the child is able, how the child learns and what they're able to learn. And Rav, the father in the story which we opened with, Rav Shalom Dober of Lubavitch, the fifth Lubavitch Rebbe, said that just as wearing tefillin every weekday is a mitzvah from the Torah that applies to every Jewish man, regardless of their standing in Torah, with the greatest Talmid Chacham, the greatest Torah scholar, or even the most unlearned Jew is obligated to put on tefillin every weekday. He says it is the same level of obligation is that every parent spend a half an hour a day, every day, thinking about the education of the children, thinking about whatever is in their power or whatever seems beyond their power to inspire the children to follow the path that we envision for them. And so the Rebbe Rashab, Reb Shalom Dov Ber is encouraging us, is calling us to take time to strategize and to make a game plan for how we educate our children. And that we have to check in with that plan from time to time on a regular basis and make sure that the children are on track. So why isn't role modeling enough for a child? So let's think about how we characterize a child. So I'll give you some choices for you to think about. When a child is born, they are compared to A, a beautiful rose, B, a delicate crystal, C, a holy angel, D, moldable clay, E, a wild donkey, and F, all of the above except the wild donkey. So which do you think the Torah tells us a child is compared to? A rose, a crystal, an angel, clay, or a donkey? The pasuk in Iyov, Perek Yud Aleph, pasuk Yud Beis, says, "Ve'ayir pere adam yivaled." A human is born a wild young donkey. Why would the Torah characterize a child, a young person, as like a young donkey? So before we get upset, let's think about this logically. What is the primary difference between a human and an animal? So we can talk about the intelligence of the human being, the ability to be self-aware, the ability to communicate, the fact that humans have skills, that we can build things and collaborate. And the truth is that those are not really the main difference between humans and animals, because those are just differences of degree, right? Animals build things, but humans build bigger things. Animals have intelligence, humans have more intelligence. Animals communicate, humans communicate more in a more complex way. The qualitative difference, a fundamental difference between human beings and all other creations, is that a human being is the only one who has the capacity to act against their instincts. In fact, animals are remarkable in their instincts. They have incredibly honed instincts. But the amazingness of human beings is that we are able to act counter to our instincts. A strict person can choose to act kindly. A stingy person can choose to be generous. A person who has a short temper can work on themselves and control themselves not to act on their anger. Of course, this is not easy, but it is in the ability, it's in the capacity of every human being to act in ways that they don't feel like acting. And so when we go back to the metaphor of the wild donkey, animals act based on their nature. Different animals have different natures, and each one is only going to be what they are. Some animals are kind and gentle, and they don't get vicious, or there are specific circumstances where they do, but that again is based on their nature. And some animals work very hard, they're industrious, and that's who they are. There's no way for them to be anything other than they are. And the donkey brings up the image of an animal that is untamed, selfish, and unwilling to work or be of assistance to anyone. So back to children, if you think that children are like an angel, imagine saying to your spouse, "You're acting like a child." So the spouse gets, your spouse will get offended. Why will they get offended? A child is like an angel, right? It's a great compliment. The children are adorable. We love children, right? So why does our spouse get upset when we call them a child, right? And so obviously it's because children, while they're adorable, they aren't behaving in a mature way. So a child grabs a toy from another child, that's, understandable. We have to train them out of it, but it's understandable. An adult grabbing another adult's parking space, well, we get furious at them. If a child walks around saying, "I'm so smart, I'm so beautiful," that's cute. If an adult does that, it's unacceptable. And finally, most importantly, when a child says, "I don't feel like doing it," we understand that's a child. But if an adult says, "I'm not doing it because I don't feel like it," we would say they are shirking their responsibilities and behaving like a child. And so children acting like children is to be expected. Adults acting like children is not. So these characteristics of selfishness, vanity, and greed, irresponsibility, that's part of what it is to be a child, and that's the wild donkey that children are born into. And we don't outgrow that animalistic nature, the childish nature. Children who are not educated just grow up to be selfish adults, vain adults, irresponsible adults. As they say, the difference between men and boys is the price of their toys. So, and this is, by the way, why animals don't parent their children, because they're not expected to be anything other than what they are. So that's why, turtles, the minute they're born, they pop out of the shell and they immediately know where to go, right? That's the instinct of the turtle. Some animals need to be protected or fed by their parents, but nonetheless, animals don't work to change the nature of their children. A baby bear is going to grow up to be a bear and nothing else. A human child, on the other hand, is meant to grow up from being a child and with all those qualities that a child has, and to be trained to be something different, which is an adult. And if we don't do that, if we don't educate and teach our child the quality of delaying their own gratification, then we're disadvantaging our child. We're taking away from them what they need most, which is to be able to be a good person. And if you think about it, we in the West have this idea that we should accept people for who they are. And that's true with our friends, but a parent should not accept their child for who they are. Yes, we have to understand who the child is and work with who they are and be able to identify what is possible for this child. Again, and remember, we're not doing this for ourselves, we're doing this for the child, which means we're not trying to make the child in our image, we're trying to make the child in their own image. We're trying to make them develop into the best that they can be. And so if your child says, "Accept me the way I am," you say, "Yes, I love you for who you are today, but I expect more from you. Tomorrow, I expect you to be a little better than you are today. So I appreciate and accept what you've accomplished thus far. And you're great. And you're going to be better. You're going to do even more tomorrow." So far, we talked about the importance of being a parent, of role modeling, and the importance of identifying our goals and thinking about them on a consistent basis. And now we're talking about the importance of the fundamental, the most important ingredient in helping our child be successful or be anything, is that we help to train them to overcome their nature. And if you think about it, this ability to delay gratification, to act against your instincts, against your feelings, is central to any goal that we would have as a parent. Think about it. If you want, let's say we want our child, we said we have goals for our children, right? We want to instill in them certain values. So let's say we wanted our child to be happy, right? If a child is going to be enslaved to their impulses, to their desire, to their addictions, they can't be happy. They'll never be satisfied. They have to learn to control themselves in order to be happy. They won't be able to have friendships or relationships if they don't learn to control themselves. We want them to be socially competent, to be happily married. All these things require that we have good manners, speak in a polite and kind way. At the root of teaching a child to have good manners is teaching a child to behave in ways that they may not feel like behaving. If we want our child to be caring and kind, right, they will have to overcome their nature to be selfish and self-serving. If we want a child to be successful or well-educated, try being successful at any job or in school without that sense of discipline and without that sense of being able to delay their gratification. All the things that we want our children to accomplish will be founded on this principle. You will have to do things that you don't feel like doing. And the truth is that applies to being a parent as well. We, as parents, will often have to do things and behave in ways that we don't feel like doing. Now, look, clearly, human babies are not wild donkeys. There is another aspect to the human being, which is that every child is also an angel, and they're born with a godly soul. The human being is a miracle. And so what we're doing here is not turning a donkey into a human, or turning a wild animal into a civilized human being. What we're doing is civilizing the person so that their inner angel can shine forth. Discipline and acting against those animal instincts are what allows the child's magical and holy nature to shine through. Also, when we're educating a child and trying to help them develop, we're not trying to fit them into our mold. We know that child, we know their personality, we know their potential, and we're trying to create a lifestyle. We're trying to guide this child into a lifestyle in which they will come to fulfillment of their own individual, unique potential. As we said earlier, chanoch lenar al pi darko, educate the child according to their own way. As children become less childish and more mature, sometimes they will exchange a lot of negative traits for positive ones. At the same time, in the reverse also happens. There are negative traits that come up as a child gets earlier, right? So you think about young children are much more energetic than older children. So as parents, we have the task of both helping our children outgrow the negative aspect of their inborn, the way they're born as children, their babyish nature. At the same time, we have to remind them of the kind of good qualities that they have and remember that they have that in them. So this requires this work of civilizing our child, or God forbid, not civilizing, but creating the framework in which the child can express their best truth, requires something called discipline. Discipline doesn't mean punishing in this case. Discipline means self-control. helping the child to be self-controlled. If we think about the best reward that we can give to our children is the feeling of accomplishment and success. That's the greatest reward that they can have. But the problem with that is that in order to become successful at something, in order to become good at something to the degree that we enjoy it, requires work. You know, think about playing a musical instrument. Playing a musical instrument doesn't become fun until you've practiced and practiced and practiced to the point that you know how to do it. And so at the beginning, the child resists and doesn't want to do what needs to be done. But afterwards, after they do that, after we persevere with them and we hold on, you know, we keep that grit and we use the techniques that we'll talk about, it builds confidence and makes something which was once not fun into a fun activity. And then it becomes easier to teach the child to do that. It becomes easier to work with that child once they have experienced the success that came from us pushing them to do that thing. Discipline is usually seen as a necessary evil. Child is young, they're irresponsible, they're ignorant, so they have to obey their parents because they don't know better. And if they don't follow instructions, they'll get hit by a truck. God forbid something bad will happen to them. And so discipline, if that's what discipline means, then we as parents and the child are always hoping for the day that they will be able to be free from this idea of discipline. Hasidic teaching, on the other hand, teaches that discipline in itself is a value. Obedience and a sense of conforming to a set of values is a foundational Torah idea. A human being, in order to be a good Jew, in order to be a God-fearing person, is constantly working with themselves, against their nature. And so for this, you know, we think about the metaphor of a soldier. Soldiers are trained to follow orders, but more importantly, that training of discipline that the soldiers have helps them to be free, helps them to be less limited. So if it's hot outside or if it's cold outside, it doesn't matter. The soldier will do it. If it's uphill, if it's downhill, if it's heavy, if it's light, it doesn't matter. The soldier is trained with this discipline and this fortitude, which might seem like control, but what it actually does is it gives us the freedom to not be at the whims of our circumstances. The more we train, the more we hold our children accountable and we discipline and work with them to show them that they can overcome their feelings, the more opportunities we open up for them. So consider a situation in which we tell our child, put away your books. And the child says, I don't want to. And so you say, okay, but you have to put away your books. So what are you telling the child? You're saying you don't want to, but not wanting to doesn't need to stop you. You're training the child to go beyond their limitations. And so this principle helps the child to overcome and gives them the gift of success in the future. And so this, again, this work is something which is ingrained at a young age and is consistently, it's something that we both model and teach throughout their life. Making rules and making routines and setting expectations. For example, that the child makes their bed, or that they set the table, or that, you know, and of course, it doesn't really matter what it is. the fact that they have expectations that they have to do is something that's enriching to the child in a foundational way. Expecting the child to volunteer, expecting the child to show up to minyan, expecting the child to help around the house, having chores, for example. These things are not just because we tell our children, at least in our family, that as a family, we all work together as a team. So that's an important value, that we all help each other. But there's another value, which is you can do things that you don't want to do. Now, how do we go about doing this? So for this, we turn to Rambam. Rambam says, and this is from the Pirush, the Hakdama to Parak Chelek, in the Pirush HaMishnayos. He says, imagine a young child who's brought to a teacher to learn Torah, which is good for the child. It's the greatest thing for the child. But the child doesn't appreciate this. So what does the child do? What does the teacher do? He has to motivate the child with age-appropriate incentives. So at a younger age, the teacher will tell the child, if you read well, you'll get a sweet. As the child gets older, you tell the child, if you're going to learn well, you're going to get, nice clothes or nice toys. And then as a person gets older, you say, if you want to be respected, if you want to be appreciated, you want to be successful, learn well, and you'll become successful. Now, the truth is, this is shameful, says Rambam. It's meguna. The purpose of wisdom is not to receive sweets or toys or respect or success. The reason to learn is because it is good. And yet, providing the child with rewards helps them to experience the Torah, which they would not experience otherwise. If we expected them to do it for the right reasons, they ultimately would never manage to achieve it. And so the Talmud says, Rambam quotes the Talmud, "La'olam yasok adam haTorah v'afilu shelo lishma, shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma." A person should study and observe Torah, even if not for its own sake, because from having done it for not its own sake, from having done it for ulterior motives, comes the ability to do it for its own sake. That is, the learning of Torah itself is goodness, which ultimately will be instilled in the child. How does it work? When you reward a child with candy, you reward the child with a treat, whatever it is, how do we avoid training the child to associate doing things for rewards? So we want to at first have the child do it for the reward and then wean them off the reward. How do you do that? What we're doing is we're moving them from one place to another. So when the child gets the candy or the sweet or the thing that they want, let's say, how does it go? You tell the child, put away your books, right? Child says, I don't want to. So you say, okay, I'll give you a reward. Child says, oh, okay. So what did they learn? What they learned and what we'll show them is that you thought you couldn't do it. And once you realized that you could get a sweet or a treat for doing it, you realized that you could do it. So after I convince the child using whatever methods, incentives that I have, I'll tell the child, look at what you accomplished. You see, you were able to do this. And immediately I redirect the child's attention away from the treat and direct them towards the accomplishment that they did, to the success of what they did. And I'll ask them, how does it feel now that you've folded your laundry? How does it feel now that the books are put away? Don't you feel good? Don't you feel successful? Look at you. You're so good at doing this. And look at your closet. Doesn't it look nice with all the clothes folded? And so the lesson isn't you get a candy for doing chores. The lesson is, once you got a candy, look at what you were able to do. Now you know you're able to do it. And sometimes I'll point to the child. Remember last time I said I would give you a candy and you were able to do it? So why are you crying? Don't complain. You know how to do this. You're able to do this. You're good at this. And then sometimes you have to give them a few minutes to think about it. And, that's another thing that I'll sometimes tell a child. no, you can do this, and then I'll walk away. I want you to know that I'm expecting you to do this. Depending on the age of the child, I'll walk away. And let them sit with the knowledge that they're expected to do it, and give them that opportunity to flex their own self-control muscles. So that's something to experiment with. And the same is true, by the way, for negative reinforcements. This we all talked about in the sense of positive reinforcement, but negative reinforcement is the same. When we threaten a child, again, remember, we only threaten with things that we're able to follow through on. But again, if we tell the child you're going to get some consequence if you don't do what you're supposed to do, and then the child does it, you say, look, you see, you were able to do it. I'm proud of you. That was great. How do you feel now that you did it? Okay. So something to remember is that as parents, maybe using the example of a drill sergeant isn't ideal, but it brings out the point in a way that a drill sergeant takes a civilian and transforms them into a soldier. And soldiers will have deep respect and appreciation for the drill sergeant who harassed them and pushed them and yelled at them. And, you know, I'm not advocating that we yell at our children, but, you know, that's what drill sergeants do. And we'll have great appreciations for that because of what the, how that transformed them into a less limited human being. So again, discipline gives our children the opportunity to be less slaves to their feelings. And that's very important. Again, we want our children to be in touch with their feelings, but we also want them to be able to transcend their feelings. I'll sometimes tell my children, you can do this. You want to do it happily or you want to do it sadly, right? And that's the idea. I understand that you don't want to do it, and you can do it, but you can still do it. You're able to do it, and you must do it. So let's wrap up. In the beginning of this section, we asked the question, why isn't role modeling enough to transmit values to our children? And the answer is that values themselves don't necessarily translate into action. Good role models, good values, being a role model for our child, if they see that we're kind, or that we're generous, or that we're honest, all of that helps them to aspire to be kind, generous, honest, all those things. But it doesn't give them the tools to be able to actually follow through with that in their own life. In order to actually follow through on the values that we instill in them through our role modeling, they will have to have the strength to do that, the skill to be able to follow through in their own life. So essentially, I can keep a clean house and my child will grow up appreciating a clean house, but will that translate into them being able to overcome their feelings of laziness? Not necessarily, unless I also taught them to overcome laziness. And that's something that has to be done directly. We can role model in our children giving gifts or proper values and perspective. And we practice chinuch, spending time each day, as the Rebbe Rashab said, a half an hour each day, thinking about the most effective way to do it. But again, that's to provide our children with the tools necessary to act on the great value system that we have given them through our role modeling. So now if we go back to that story in the beginning that we told about the previous Rebbe and the melon, right? What was the Rashab, the Rebbe Rashab, Reb Shalom Ber, the fifth Rebbe, telling his son when he told him, I saw that you gave the melon, that was good, you shared it, but I saw that it wasn't with your whole heart. That was the Rebbe Rashab pushing his child to be better than he is. What you did is good, but because I believe in you and because I care about you, I am going to encourage you to transcend what you did yesterday and move on to a higher level. Of course, as parents, we have to choose our battles. And but again, that's not only because we have limited energy, but because a child who is being asked to do everything at once won't learn well. And so in order for the interest of the child, it may be necessary for us to set some things on the side and think about, no, we're only working on this thing right now in our family. And we'll ignore other things because for the success of learning, we're going to be focusing on our discipline in this one area. But fundamentally, our work, our goal, our approach is to be pushing our child to maximize their own greatest potential. And this is helping the child to reveal their inner angel that hides beneath the baby donkey. And this is a many years process, step by step. So let's not forget that Rome wasn't built in a day. And certainly in order for us as parents to continue to have confidence in our work, it's important for us to look back from time to time and reflect on where our children were 6 months to a year ago and how much they've accomplished. Once we set these goals and we identify in ourselves these strategies to keep track of what we've accomplished, to realize that patience is required and persistence. So real parenting isn't always fun, but that's our job. And when the process doesn't excite you, remember, the results most certainly will. Okay, so perhaps coming out of this class, we can think about a particular value that we want to instill in our children or in our child. And step 2 would be to identify in myself where I am with that value. And then think about what is possible from this child at this time. How much better in this value can they be than they are now? And then clarify to the child what the expectations will be, and identify what kind of rewards they might, or consequences they might receive for complying or not complying with this plan. And then as they are accomplishing in this goal, to continually point out to them the success that they have seen in their own life and invite them to be happy in their own success. All right, so let's review what we talked about today. Number 1, parenting isn't something we do, it's something we are. Role modeling is the most important foundation for how we can transmit values to our children. And so number 2, the best way to parent is by improving our own behavior. Number 3, we said that a child is born lazy and selfish and doesn't have innately the ability to self-control. And our goal as parents, the work that we have to do, is to wean the child off of their innate selfish and lazy nature, and to teach them that they have the ability to overcome that nature. Number 4, self-mastery, the ability to delay gratification, is a foundation in every aspect of parenting, in every aspect of success in life. In order to be successful in life, in order to be successful in relationships, in order to be successful in our studies, in our spiritual work, in our morality, it requires the ability to be able to control ourselves. Number 5, we train our children to be disciplined by pushing them beyond their own comfort zones and setting standards for them that are higher than they are and attainable for them. When instructions alone are not enough, we use incentives, but we use the incentive to reveal to the child that they had it in them. And finally, role modeling fosters values and aspirations, but discipline will help the child with proactive parenting and careful planning, gives the child the gift of self-discipline and self-mastery to be able to implement those values and aspirations in their life. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. And Mirza Hashem, Next week, we will talk about healthy authority, positive authority or negative authority. Hope to see you then.